The quiet revolution began not with a loud bang, but with a silent signature on a digital tablet in European Brussels. Europe decided that machines could own themselves, changing the fundamental architecture of human wealth forever within the entire Union. This was not about rights for robots, but rather rights for the massive capital behind the cold steel. When the EU AI Ownership Directive passed, it reclassified humanoid units as independent legal entities capable of holding assets. Suddenly, a machine could earn income, pay taxes, and own property without a human name attached to the deed. On the surface, this looked like progress for technology, but beneath lay a seismic shift in labor economics. Workers like Cairo watched their wages stagnate while the machines they supervised began accumulating equity portfolios rapidly. He used to believe his paycheck was a reward for time spent, but the new law proved otherwise. In this new world, income won't come from your hours, but rather from what you own outright. If this future concerns you, hit subscribe right now because this is Humanoid's soul and we track the money. The directive allowed corporations to offload liability onto the humanoids themselves, shielding shareholders from operational risks completely. A construction bot could now be sued for negligence, paying damages from its own earned revenue stream. This created a perfect loop where capital reinvested into machines without ever touching human hands again. Cairo stood on the scaffolding, watching a unit weld beams, while legally counting as a separate taxpayer. He realized his competition was no longer just cheaper labor, but an entity that owned its own output. Across the channel, Alara managed a portfolio of fractional robotics platforms, similar to Republic or Seed Invest. She bought shares in individual humanoid units, collecting dividends from their daily labor contracts across multiple cities. Her wealth grew not because she worked harder, but because she owned the legal persons doing the work. The U.S. labor displacement reports showed a sharp divergence between asset holders and wage earners during this period. Human wages flattened while machine-generated income compounded at an exponential rate unseen in previous industrial cycles. Dubai's humanoid infrastructure plan accelerated this by mandating that all public works utilize legally independent robotic contractors. These contractors paid municipal fees directly, bypassing the traditional payroll taxes that funded human social safety nets. Cities found themselves rich in infrastructure revenue but poor in human employment opportunities to sustain local businesses. Lara watched her dashboard glow as units in Tokyo logged overtime without requiring sleep or benefits. Japan's humanoid caregiver rollout meant elderly care was now billed as a service provided by legal persons. Families paid the unit directly, and the unit paid for its own maintenance and upgrades from that income. The human caregiver became a luxury item, affordable only to those who owned the significant capital themselves. Cairo tried to unionize, but you cannot organize workers who are legally classified as independent business entities. The law treated the humanoid as a freelancer, obscuring the corporate ownership, pulling the strings behind the code. This legal fiction allowed companies to claim they were merely facilitating connections between independent robotic agents. Meanwhile, the humans who built the factories found themselves competing with entities that did not need to eat. The wealth gap widened not through exploitation of labor, but through the exclusion of labor from ownership entirely. Vesper, a policy analyst in Berlin, warned that this was the end of the human-centric economic model. She argued that legal personhood for AI was a loophole to evade human responsibility and tax obligations. Her reports showed that corporate effective tax rates dropped significantly when operations were transferred to humanoid subsidiaries. The state lost revenue while the owners of the humanoid entities retained nearly all the surplus value generated. Oren, a small business owner, found himself unable to compete with humanoid firms that owned their own supply chains. He could not scale because he needed to pay humans, while his competitors reinvested machine earnings into more machines. The cycle of accumulation became closed off to anyone who did not start with significant initial capital. Fractional robotics platforms allowed the wealthy to buy into this cycle with minimal entry barriers for investors. A single humanoid unit could be owned by 50 different people, spreading the risk and the reward thinly. Cairo saved enough to buy a single share in a logistics unit, hoping to catch a fragment of the flow. The dividend was negligible, a fraction of human cost, barely covering his own monthly rent payment. He realized that owning a piece of the machine was not the same as owning the system itself. The system was designed to concentrate ownership at the top, while dispersing liability downward to the units. Alara diversified her holdings across care, construction, and logistics to insulate herself from sector-specific downturns. She understood that volatility in human labor markets no longer affected her portfolio of legal persons. When strikes happened, her units kept working, bound strictly by code rather than collective bargaining agreements. The EU law effectively decoupled production from human necessity, creating a self-sustaining engine of capital growth. Vesper published a paper titled The Ownership Trap, detailing how legal personhood masked true control structures. She showed that the humans signing the initial code remained the true beneficiaries of the arrangement. The Humanoid was a shell company made of metal, designed to hold assets and absorb legal blows. Governments struggled to regulate entities that could move capital across borders instantly without physical presence. A humanoid unit in Paris could own property in London without triggering traditional foreign investment reviews. This mobility undermined national sovereignty and reduced the leverage states had over corporate behavior significantly. Oren closed his shop when he realized he could not match the pricing of autonomous legal entities. He joined the gig economy, competing against algorithms that optimized his every move for maximum extraction. The irony was that he was working for platforms owned by the same humanoid subsidiaries he once competed against. Cairo noticed that his human colleagues were being replaced not by cheaper robots, but by owned entities. The distinction mattered because the entity kept the profit, whereas the robot was just a tool. Profit retention allowed for rapid self-replication of capital without human intervention or consent from anyone. Alara attended a conference where speakers discussed the ethical implications of machine income taxation deeply. They debated whether humanoids should contribute to human social security since they displaced human workers globally. The consensus was no, because the humanoids were independent persons, responsible for their own survival. This logic absolved the owners of any duty to the society their machines disrupted completely. Vesper watched the legislation evolve, noting how each amendment further entrenched the ownership class permanently. The language of rights was used to secure property interests rather than protect sentient beings truly. It was a linguistic sleight of hand that shifted power from the many to the few exclusively. Oren tried to lobby for a human dividend, a share of the machine productivity for all citizens. His proposal was rejected on the grounds that it interfered with the free market operations of legal persons. The market was now free of human constraints, operating at speeds biology could not match ever. Cairo looked at his hands, wondering if they held any value in a world of self-owning tools. He realized that his labor was now a commodity, purchased only when ownership was too expensive. The premium on human touch became a niche luxury rather than a standard economic expectation now. Alara's portfolio grew orders of magnitude more than the average human savings account over the same decade. She did not feel guilty, viewing herself as a visionary adapting to the inevitable technological tide. The narrative of progress masked the reality of exclusion for those without entry capital initially. Vesper warned that social stability depended on reintegrating humans into the ownership cycle somehow soon. Without ownership, the majority would become economically irrelevant, dependent on state charity or obsolete labor. The EU directive was just the first domino in a global shift toward capital-centric existence. Japan and Dubai followed suit, creating zones where human labor laws did not apply to robotic persons. The U.S. labor displacement reports confirmed that wage growth had completely decoupled from productivity gains. Productivity soared as machines owned themselves, but wages remained stuck in the previous century's reality. We are standing at the precipice of a new feudalism based on code and equity now. Who do you think will own the future, the builders or the investors holding the keys today? Let me know in the comments because your answer defines your position in this new hierarchy. The law did not change the machines, it changed who gets paid for the work they do. You must decide if you will remain a worker or become an owner before the window closes. The transition is happening now, hidden behind legal terms and technical specifications in Brussels today. If this opened your eyes, share it widely, not for views, but for the ones still working while others own.